Subscribe now, hit like, and leave a comment. Because once the gates open, the real danger doesn't disappear. It follows. The sirens wailed across the outskirts of Pueblo County, just before sunrise, blue lights tearing through the fog. A stolen sedan had been found abandoned near a truck stop off Highway 50. Engine still warm, driver gone. Inside the glove box, state troopers found a folded release document stamped 24 hours earlier. The name on it came from a place few ever leave alive, ADX Florence. By the time Deputy Claire Hensley arrived, federal agents were already sealing the area. This wasn't a routine parole check. The man released, Calvin Rourke, had spent 15 years in total isolation. No cellmate, no human touch. Officially, he was nonviolent. Unofficially, his file was redacted so heavily it read like a blackout poem. Rourke had been free for less than 12 hours. His release had been quiet by design. No press, no announcement. At 3:40 a.m., the final gate at ADX Florence slid open, and he stepped into the cold Colorado air with a small clear bag containing his papers and a prepaid phone. Cameras caught him blinking like the world was too bright, too wide. He didn't look back at the prison. He never did. The first thing Rourke did wasn't call family. He walked, miles of it, past scrubland and empty roads, his breathing shallow, his hands shaking. He later told investigators the silence outside felt louder than anything he'd known. Inside ADX, silence had shaped. Out here it moved. At 6:12 a.m., the prepaid phone pinged a tower near the truck stop. One outgoing call. 37 seconds. The recipient was listed under a burner registered 3 years earlier to a dead address in Nevada. That was when the chase began. Agent Lucas Reed had tracked post-release failures before. Men who spiraled vanished, reoffended. But ADX releases were different. They didn't break down. They recalibrated. Reed had argued against releasing Rourke at all, citing psychological markers that didn't fade with time. The parole board disagreed. Budget pressures. Lawsuits. Optics. Now Reed stood over the abandoned sedan, eyes fixed on the tire marks leading back to highway. He didn't steal this car, he said quietly. Someone brought it to him. As the hours passed, more names surfaced. Rourke wasn't the only former ADX inmate released that week. 3 others, spaced across different states, each with similar conditions, each with limited supervision, each with sealed evaluations citing successful behavioral containment. Containment didn't mean rehabilitation. Deputy Hensley interviewed a waitress who claimed she'd served Rourke coffee that morning. She remembered his eyes. Like he was counting exits, she said. Like he was still inside. By noon, another report came in. A halfway house in New Mexico had missed a check-in. The resident, Marcus Vale, had been released from ADX 36 hours earlier. His room was untouched. Bed made. Phone gone. On the wall, written faintly in pencil, was a single word, outside. Reed pulled the files side by side. Rourke. Vale. Another name circled in red, Jonah Pike. Released 20 hours earlier. Last seen boarding a bus westbound. ADX Florence hadn't just released inmates. It had released a pattern. At 2:03 p.m., surveillance cameras at the truck stop updated. A man matching Rourke's description stood by a payphone that hadn't worked in years. He wasn't calling. He was waiting. When a black pickup rolled in, Rourke climbed into the passenger seat without hesitation. The license plate was fake. The driver's face never showed. Reed felt the cold certainty settle in. The first 24 hours after ADX weren't about freedom. They were about reconnection. Old networks. Old promises. Old debts. Back at headquarters, an analyst flagged a document buried in Rourke's release file, a psychological exit interview never submitted to board. The notes were brief, unsettling. Subject displays adaptive patience, not deprogrammed. Exposure to open environments may activate long-term contingency plans. Reed stared at the words, then at the map dotted with moving markers. Former inmates, spreading out, quietly. When agents traced a burner phone call, it led to a voicemail box with single saved message. No voice, just Background noise, wind, traffic, footsteps, and a phrase spoken once, low and deliberate. "We're ready." As night fell, Reed realized a mistake everyone had made. ADX Florence hadn't taught these men how to survive inside. It had taught them how to wait. And somewhere beyond the reach of cameras and walls, their first day of freedom was only beginning. By midnight, the map on Agent Lucas Reed's screen no longer showed isolated dots. It showed movement, purpose. 3 former ADX inmates, released within 48 hours of each other, were now traveling in different directions. But not randomly. Their paths formed a loose arc across the southwest, converging towards something Reed couldn't yet see. Every instinct he had told him this wasn't coincidence. ADX prisoners didn't just walk free and disappear. They followed plans that had taken years to build. Reed hadn't slept. Neither had Deputy Claire Hensley, who was now standing in a dimly lit evidence room staring at a cardboard box pulled from deep storage. It was marked with an old case number, 15 years old, the same year Calvin Rourke had entered ADX Florence. Inside were photographs, transcripts, and a sealed envelope stamped federal hold. "Do not release." Hensley opened it anyway. The contents made her stomach tighten. The envelope contained interview summaries from multiple inmates housed in different Supermax facilities across the country. The common thread wasn't violence. It was information, names of officials, dates, transfer schedules, all annotated with the same phrase written in different handwriting samples. "Wait until outside." Back in the field, a patrol unit found a black pickup abandoned near a dry riverbed. No fingerprints. No DNA. Whoever had driven it knew exactly how long to stay and when to vanish. But one thing had been missed. A receipt crumpled beneath the seat. Cash purchase. Hardware store. Time stamped less than an hour earlier. Bolt cutters. Duct tape. Rope. Reed felt the pressure ratchet up. This wasn't about escape or survival. This was preparation. Meanwhile, in a small town outside Flagstaff, Jonah Pike sat alone in a motel room, lights off, television muted. He hadn't slept since his release. Every sound outside made his muscles tense. Freedom felt like exposure, like standing under a spotlight with no walls to hide behind. He checked his phone. No service. That was intentional. Pike had survived ADX by becoming invisible. He spoke only when required. He memorized routines. He listened. People thought isolation broke men. It didn't. It sharpened them. A knock came at the door. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Pike opened it without asking who was there. Calvin Rourke stepped inside, looking thinner than the last time Pike had seen him. Years ago, through reinforced glass, shouting just loud enough to be heard during the single hour they were allowed near each other in adjacent recreation cages. "You made it," Rourke said. Pike nodded. Barely. They didn't hug. They didn't smile. That kind of emotion had been trained out of them. "We're missing one," Pike said. "Veil's delayed," Rourke replied. "Not gone." Rourke pulled a folded map from his jacket and spread it on the bed. Locations were circled in red. Dates written in pencil. Times precise down to the minute. This was never about revenge. Rourke said quietly, "It's about correction." At the same time, Reed finally cracked the SEAL's psychological evaluations. The reason they'd been buried became painfully clear. ADX therapists had documented a phenomenon rarely acknowledged publicly: collective conditioning. Inmates held in long-term isolation had begun communicating through pattern, taps, movement timing, even silence itself. Over years, they built a shared framework, a philosophy. ADX hadn't stopped them from organizing. It had forced them to do it perfectly. At 3:17 a.m., an alarm triggered at a private storage facility outside Albuquerque. By the time police arrived, the unit was empty, but not broken into. The lock code had been used correctly. The unit was rented under a shell company that no longer existed. Inside, investigators found evidence of long-term planning: burner phones, cash sealed in vacuum bags, false IDs, and a single printed document titled Phase 2, First Contact. Reed read it twice, his pulse pounding. Phase 2 listed names. federal officials, former prosecutors, a retired ADX warden. These aren't random targets, Hensley said, her voice low. These are the people who built the system. As dawn approached, Marcus Vale finally resurfaced, captured briefly on traffic cameras entering a city far from the others. Alone, or so it appeared, he walked into a crowded bus terminal and disappeared into the flow of people. Then Reed's phone rang. A voice he recognized immediately came through the line. Calm, controlled, unmistakably familiar. You told them we were safe. The voice said that we were fixed. Reed's blood ran cold. Calvin, we gave you 15 years, Rourke continued. Silence, stillness, patience. Now it's your turn to listen. The call ended. As Reed stared at the dead screen, another alert flashed across the system. One of the names on the Phase 2 list had gone missing, and the first 24 hours of freedom were officially over. The missing man was found at sunrise, but not where anyone expected. His car sat untouched in a federal parking structure in Denver, key still in the ignition, security badge placed neatly on the dashboard as if he'd stepped away for coffee and never returned. Inside the trunk, investigators discovered a single item, a sealed manila folder labeled Aftercare Reports, ADX Florence. Agent Lucas Reed arrived before the media, before the official statements, before the narrative could be shaped. He knew what this was. A message, not chaos control. The reports inside the folder detailed something the Bureau had denied for years. Experimental post-isolation reintegration protocols. Psychological manipulation disguised as rehabilitation. Inmates released not because they were safe, but because they were useful. Test subjects. Pressure points. The missing official hadn't been taken at random. He had signed off on every report. By midday, a second name on the Phase 2 list vanished. No car, no phone, no struggle, just absence. The public was told it was coincidence. Reed knew better. The men from ADX weren't running. They were executing a schedule. In a rented warehouse outside Phoenix, Calvin Rourke watched a wall of screens flicker with live news coverage. Jonah Pike sat nearby, methodically dismantling a burner phone. Marcus Vale leaned against a concrete pillar, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the footage. They're still calling it a manhunt, Vale said. They don't get it. They won't, Rourke replied. Not until the end. Reed finally traced the calls, the rentals, the shell companies, all back to one overlooked thread, a defunct nonprofit once contracted by the Bureau to study long-term isolation effects. It had been shut down quietly after a whistleblower disappeared. The name on the original complaint stopped Reed cold. Calvin Rourke. ADX hadn't silenced him. It had turned him into proof. That night, Reed received an encrypted email. No threats, no demands, just a location and a time. Against protocol, he went alone. The meeting point was an abandoned courthouse scheduled for demolition. The irony wasn't lost on him. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog. The benches were overturned. The judge's bench stripped bare. Rourke stood at the center of the room, hands visible, calm as ever. You're early, Reed said. Old habit, Rourke replied. In ADX, timing is survival. Reed wanted to arrest him, wanted to end it, but he listened. You think this is revenge, Rourke said. It's not. It's documentation. Exposure. Every man we've touched is alive. Unharmed. Hidden. They'll reappear when the files go public. You kidnapped them, Reed said. We protected them, Rourke corrected, from the system they built. Rourke handed Reed a drive. Everything's there. Audio, video, orders. You're in it too, Lucas. Not as a villain, as a witness. Before Reed could respond, alarms echoed outside. Floodlights cut through broken windows. Rourke stepped back. This ends the night, Reed said. Rourke smiled faintly. No, it begins. When agents stormed the courthouse, they found Reed alone. No Rourke, no Pike, no Vale, just a drive and a single handwritten note on the bench. Freedom doesn't end at the gate. It echoes. Within 48 hours, the files leaked. Congressional hearings followed. ADX Florence was placed under independent review. Officials resigned. Programs were suspended. The public demanded answers. The missing men returned, alive, silent, refusing interviews. The Bureau declared the threat neutralized. 3 months later, a body was discovered in a remote desert rest stop. Natural causes, they said. But tucked into the man's jacket pocket was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn. It read, Phase 3, Monitoring. Agent Reed received one final message that night, from a number that no longer existed by morning. You can't unlearn what you know, it said. Neither can they. Reed stared at the screen, understanding settling in like a weight. ADX had released its prisoners, but it had also released its secrets. And somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the cameras, the men it tried to erase were still watching, still waiting. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one.